What's going on, guys? Well, as those of you that are fans know, this past Monday we got the series finale to one of the best shows of all time, Better Call Saul. And now that I've reviewed all the episodes, I've reviewed all the past seasons, I wanted to do a few rankings in regards to the show. And today we're going to talk about all 6 seasons of Better Call Saul and rank them from worst or least best to best. Before I get started, I will say clearly I'm a big fan of this show. I don't think that there is a bad or even a mediocre season in this bunch. So this is one of those awesome rare rankings to where every single entry that I am trying to grade is a very good entry. It's a good season. Unfortunately, there's some seasons that are just awesome, that are better than others. Same when I tried to rank Breaking Bad, it's like trying to pick your favorite kids at that point. So with that being said, let me know all of your passionate views down below on the ranking of these seasons, why you prefer certain ones to certain ones, and let's have an awesome conversation about Better Call Saul down there and not be jerks to each other, please. So starting off at number 6 for me is going to be season 2. Now, I still enjoy this season. I still have a lot of fun with it. It played much better on rewatch for me, but I do find it to be the least exciting, the least interesting of these 6 seasons, which again, as I've said, is a tall order anyway. I like some of the schemes here. I like some of the character work. I like the way that they're continuing to build the relationship between Jimmy and Kim. I love the last 2-3 episodes of this season when it's focusing on Jimmy scamming his own brother and doctoring up those documents regarding the banks and changing the address to sabotage his brother. All of that stuff is great. And there's some increasingly interesting things going on with Mike in regards to his relationship with Nacho and his feud with Tuco. And this is where the show really started to prove that they can set things up from Breaking Bad. They can have characters from Breaking Bad, but they're going to utilize them in a way that services Better Call Saul. But where this season goes down to the bottom for me is that I feel like it's really just a retread of all the things that we were doing and learning about these characters in the first season. The first season, you have this journey that shows you who Jimmy is and the early building blocks of how he is going to eventually become Saul Goodman, the early stages of his feud with his brother. And in this season, they kind of had to take a few steps backward as far as the character development and the character relationships in order to retread some familiar territory once again. So you have Jimmy yet again an entire season where it shows that he can't just help himself. He can't do the right thing. He can't go down the right path because he always has to resort to the schemes and resort to cutting corners. And there's this whole visual thing the entire season where he's trying to shove this really cheap ass tumbler into this expensive ass car, and it's like a representation that Jimmy cannot fit within this law firm that he has this awesome job with. He's going to destroy it at some point. He just does not belong. So it's still entertaining, but it's a season that just doesn't really move forward enough for me. And this is the season where I found a lot of the people that I talked to that gave up on Better Call Saul. This is the season that did it. And so I've always encouraged people, watch at least to season 3, because that's where things really start to move forward. Number 5 for me, and this might be the controversial take on this ranking, but keep in mind, I'm saying all these seasons are very good. It's the final season for me, season 6. Now, while this season was a very satisfying ending to this show and a satisfying ending to these characters and potentially this entire universe, we might never ever get a story within this Breaking Bad universe again as far as we know. I think it ends on a very good note, ends on a very satisfying and emotionally satisfying note. So overall, I think that they do what seems to be the near impossible for television shows, and that's landing the plane in a very pleasing way. The highs of this season are among the highest highs of the entire show. Episode 3, where you've got the swan song for Nacho, I think is one of the best episodes of the entire show, and certainly the best performance by Michael Mando and that character. I think that little 3 or 4 episode stretch that kind of sandwiches around that mid-season break is some of the most tension-filled and intense storylines that we've had in this entire show, and certainly the season. And the final episode is one of the best episodes of TV ever, certainly one of the best finales. Unfortunately, this season also has some of the lowest lows of this entire show for me personally. I really didn't mind the 7-episode stretch where it's just tiny little meticulous details about how they're going to set up Howard Hamlin, but that is something that doesn't feel necessary to be 7 episodes long. It felt like they could have gotten there a little bit sooner and probably been a little bit more satisfying by that point, but I still mildly enjoyed all of the schemes. That's kind of the heart of this show whenever it's trying to be comedic anyway. In the latter half of the season, I really did not understand or enjoy the 4-episode long epilogue. I know what they were trying to do there. I understand that they're trying to build up to certain things, and I'm not even going to go as far as to say that they should have done it differently or they should have done it the way that I would do it, because these writers are way smarter and way better at their jobs than I could ever be. But for me personally, as a viewer, I didn't feel like 4 episodes was necessary for that storyline. Those 2 episodes where it's just focusing on Gene scheming with the cab driver was some of the most uninteresting and unappealing episodes that I've seen in this show. Still very good television though. That just shows you, even on a bad day at the office, they're better than most shows, but it just felt like maybe the runtime of this season was padded out a little bit too much. It was a 13-episode order compared to the usual 10, and it just didn't feel like those extra 3 episodes was utilized in the best way. I think we could have gotten everything out of those 4 episodes at the end of this series in 3, maybe even 2 episodes, and been more satisfying for my own personal tastes. So this may change upon rewatch. This is the only season of this show that I've only watched once, so keep that in mind. But as a viewer, as somebody that has been with this show since the beginning, this is one of the most frustrating seasons for me, with the different high highs and low lows, and by the end of it, it was a bit of a mixed experience for me. Number 4 is going to be season 1. This was a great start out season, especially on rewatch. When you come out of Breaking Bad and you walk into a spinoff or a prequel and you kind of have certain expectations, this show was certainly a bit jarring and a bit unexpected with the tone and the approach that they were taking, all for the better. But my first viewing experience, I was like, I'm in it because I love these characters and I love this universe, but I don't necessarily know if Breaking Bad didn't exist if I would have stuck with this show past the first season on first watch. Upon rewatch, it works so much better being able to binge this show. I think it's fun. I think that the comedic tone, aside from the drama, is a really nice balance that they play in Better Call Saul. I like seeing Saul as Jimmy, as this guy that wants to do the right thing but just can't figure out how to take that path without scamming, without taking the corners. I love the relationship that it starts between Jimmy and Chuck, Chuck being one of the more interesting characters of this entire universe, and the multi-layered dynamic of their issues with each other, to where you very much see both sides in certain respects. And the tragedy of it all, knowing where things end up in Breaking Bad, seeing this character trying to do the right thing and just wanting his brother's admiration and respect so much that not getting that sets him on this path of destruction that we watched in Breaking Bad and then eventually through the rest of Better Call Saul as well. Howard Hamlin, not the most interesting character of this show. I'll talk more about that when I talk about the characters of this universe, but this is a season where he's pretty much played to just be a bit of a douchebag. Becomes a little bit more of a multi-layered character later on, but here, very one-note character. Kim, I enjoy her very much throughout this show, but this season their relationship wasn't the most prevalent thing. And of course, Mike. Mike was the big surprise for me in season 1, because when Breaking Bad ended, I said that Mike is a character that I would love to see a spinoff with, because he's just got such a fascinating history and a fascinating dynamic, and I love the fact that this show started to bring him in to where it kind of became half him and Gus's show by about season 3. And I liked his storyline here, where he's just the toll booth attendant, and then about halfway through the season you get to see what events regarding his son and this police corruption created the character that we saw years later in Breaking Bad. So season 1, I think, a very entertaining start to this season that played so much better in binge format. Now, these next 3 seasons to me are all top tier television, like some of the best seasons of television of all time. Just like my Breaking Bad ranking on my top 3 with that show, it's like splitting hairs and razor thin differences in the quality of these seasons, but I do have my own personal preferences with them. So number 3 for me is going to be season 5. Now, there was so many things that were awesome about this season, especially with the introduction of the character of Lalo, who will end up being one of my favorite villains of this entire universe. Such a terrifying and menacing character that is so charming and fun to watch, and very rarely can you find an actor that is so talented that can bring both of those dynamics, and Breaking Bad seems to be able to do it just as often as Better Call Saul with the character of Lalo, some of the best villains on TV. So I love Lalo's pursuit against Gus and against Mike, trying to figure out what's going on with this underground lab. I like all of the fallout regarding the underground lab and a lot of the storyline that we got last season. That's one of the more interesting pieces of the storyline to me regarding Gus that I was so glad that they tapped into in Better Call Saul. You have Jimmy here for the first season is Saul all the way through. He is now Saul Goodman. And him kind of pursuing that side of the character really changed up his dynamic in the show a bit, to where you're starting to see the early building blocks of this guy who eventually became this kind of squirmy lawyer that we knew in Breaking Bad, that is now completely reframed as far as rewatch when you look at that character now knowing the events of this show. And I love him and Kim's relationship in this season as well, to where she is now so kind of intoxicated with the thrill of these schemes that I kind of reframed the way that I looked at Better Call Saul as almost like the Breaking Bad story of Kim in a certain way. And this season's where that's most prevalent. So her joining in a lot of the schemes with him, while also starting to feel like she wants to carve her own path, to where she is wanting to do this pro bono stuff, starting to get much less interested in Mesa Verde, and becoming a very strong, independent character that becomes one of the more fascinating characters of the show within the last season 4 and this season to me. And I also think this is the best season, the most engaging season regarding Nacho's character, to where he's pulled between these two worlds. He has this vendetta against the Salamancas, trying to protect his father. He's also got this thing with Gus, to where Gus has him now blackmailed and kind of like a marionette on a string, and he's trying to navigate all of this while keeping him and his father alive. I still don't think that they utilize that character enough throughout the show, but for what we do get of him, this is his best season. While this is number 3 and not my top season, I think this is easily the least interesting season as far as Mike's storyline. He basically is just bitter this entire season because of the events of season 4 and the underground lab and the German engineer that he had to kill. And so the first 2/3 of this season, first half of this season, is him just kind of getting out of this life and not wanting anything to do with it, and then Gus trying to groom him back. And that's just not the most interesting storyline to do with that character. It just sets him up to where they need him to be with Gus for the final season, and that's not very compelling to me. So still one of the best seasons ever, but it's really just that Mike storyline that drops it down a little bit for me. Number 2 is going to be season 4, and as far as the Gus and Mike storyline, this is top tier for me. This is the best storyline that they have gotten, where it's really showing the construction of this underground lab and how they were able to do this without any prying eyes, without any attention being drawn to them. I thought that was fantastic and fascinating, the way that it was framed, the way that it was shot, the way that it was written. Having these foreign engineers come down and these foreign construction workers live in this bunker for the better part of a year was something that was certainly a boiling pot that was eventually going to boil over, and I just liked seeing how these different characters interacted and how Gus and Mike went about this long, painstaking process. The whole storyline regarding Werner and his eventual fall was some of the most fascinating character stuff they've done with this show, and some of the most fascinating stuff that they've done with Mike, really just showing his inner turmoil, his own version of a moral compass, and really reinforcing that even though he has like this view that if you're in the game, if you're doing shady stuff, it's pretty much fair game and I'm going to do whatever I'm hired to do, but also having this moral complication with it. It's some of the best stuff regarding his character. And I even enjoyed the stuff before you get to the underground lab, where Mike is essentially trying to act as an employee, as a security employee for Madrigal, and he's just sneaking into all these warehouses and doing his Mike thing. That was also very entertaining. As far as Jimmy, this is the aftermath season of his brother's death, and you have a whole season here to where he's kind of refusing to deal with it, while also trying to bide his time until he can eventually re-up his status with the bar. And so you get a whole season where he's doing these scams with the cell phones, and he's getting a little bit more involved with the criminal element here while he's not allowed to practice law, and setting up his relationship with Huel, who is one of the better side characters in this show in Breaking Bad, especially in Better Call Saul. And his relationship with Kim has a lot of turmoil as well, to where she doesn't know how to navigate how he's responding to Chuck's death, doesn't know how to navigate how he is going about business and trying to earn money. This came close. It came close to being my number 1. The only reason that it's not is just because of how fantastic all the way from start to finish my number 1 actually is. But my number 1 favorite season of Better Call Saul is season 3. To me, this is where the show really came into its own. This is where it really found its footing, found its best form of pacing, and for those of us that are Breaking Bad fans, found its also perfect mix of integrating a lot of the Breaking Bad flavor and characters and kind of the excitement and the tension that we expect from that show into Better Call Saul. This is where it all came together for me, and why I always recommend to people that kind of gave up in season 1 or 2, at least watch season 3. If you get through that season and are no longer interested, then this is just not your show. First and foremost, the entire season-long feud between Chuck and Jimmy is fascinating here, to where Chuck is going with everything that he has to try to take Jimmy out of practicing law, and Jimmy is finally taking the gloves off and is just going after Chuck with everything that he has, and culminating in the courtroom scene that was one of the best episodes of this show, to where he uses Huel and sets up his brother to make him look like a psycho in front of the bar board. And just the way that everything unfolds, like just a house of cards falling onto Chuck. For things that Chuck is 90% correct about, is just fascinating television. Fascinating character stuff between these two. And the way that Kim is slowly kind of getting integrated into this as well. This is the season where I really started to kind of understand their relationship. First 2 seasons, I wasn't quite buying it. Kim just seems like such a classy person, that the kind of squirmy and greasy person that Jimmy is, I just never quite bought them being together in a romantic fashion. This season started to change that and started to show that little bit of a taste that she wants for the bold lifestyle that he lives, and it all came together for me. This is also the season where you start to integrate Gus and a lot of that other Breaking Bad storyline, the prequel stuff, that I was really fascinated to see how much they were going to do. So you get Mike at the end of season 2 that was instructed not to kill Hector Salamanca, and we all knew it was Gus. And so eventually, in the beginning of this season, he comes face to face with Gus through these little schemes where he switches out some trackers in a badass way. Just some of the coolest shit with Mike in this season is just how smart and how badass that character is. And starting that very interesting working relationship and mutual respect between those two characters, to where Gus starts to use Mike and hire Mike and work with Mike, that leads to a relationship that was just fascinating to watch, not only through the rest of this series, but through Breaking Bad. So all of the different things that they set up in season 3 and all of the different things that they carry through with season 3, to me, was just a season that had no fat on it whatsoever, that had nothing that I was mixed on or nothing that I felt was a little less interesting than something else. I mean, all the way from start to finish, this was captivating stuff for me. So when I think about Better Call Saul in retrospect, I typically think about this season and that giant feud between Jimmy and Chuck that eventually leads to Chuck taking his own life. And you also get some of the more interesting stuff going on with the character of Nacho as well, where he's plotting the murder of Hector Salamanca, which obviously is not within Gus's plan, by switching these nitroglycerin capsules with sugar pills, and the way that they set that whole thing up make it just such a tense sequence where he's just going to swap pills, but they make every single detail of this action so important and so life or death that just him dropping a bottle of pills is some of the most tense stuff you're going to see on television. One of my favorite seasons as far as Nacho's storyline. But overall, for me, season 3 was where this show really hit its stride. It had the perfect mix of its own Better Call Saul, like lawyer-centric identity, while really ramping up a lot of the Breaking Bad cartel style. To me, this was where the show had the best even mix and had the best collection of episodes. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my Better Call Saul reviews and also my Breaking Bad ranking, and stay tuned and subscribe, because I am going to be ranking all of the Better Call Saul seasons against the Breaking Bad seasons next week. So subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Thank you for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.